Good morning, everyone. And I know it's Saturday morning. You probably have a lot of better things to do, so I really appreciate you coming out and listening a little bit about water quality here in the Valley. I do want to point out a few people. Ed Pack is a member of our board, elected by you and representing you on our board. And we also have Franz de Klotz. There he is there in the back. And we have lots of volunteers that are volunteering their time here this morning to answer your questions and provide additional information. I've had the opportunity to talk at a lot of functions outside of California. Everybody wants to know how California is dealing with all the regulations. We are usually the leaders in drinking water regulations and other regulations. So they always like to hear how we're dealing with it. So it's nice to have the opportunity. And the district here is very proactive in what needs to be done to comply with drinking water regulations and to provide the best quality water service at the best price. So because of that, they are very progressive. We get to get out there in front and learn a lot about what needs to be done and try to forecast what we need to do in the future. So we're going to talk a little bit about general water quality first. And let's go ahead and get started. So where's the source of our tap water? We have a large watershed with these mountains. And over hundreds, if not thousands of years, that precipitation, the melting snow, has drained into this valley and filled up our groundwater basin, the aquifer. Basically, it's a big bedrock bowl filled with sediments of all different sizes. And in between those sediment particles is the water. And that's an aquifer. And that's our huge resource for providing our water, most of our water resources here in the valley. The water comes in naturally, as I described, and it also comes in from imported supplies. In the East Valley, we've had Colorado River water flow into the East Valley naturally for eons. It would come in, and then it would go to the Delta, and then it would come into the valley. So the Colorado River has been an important part of our water resources here in the Coachella Valley. In addition, we are importing water through contracts that we negotiate for and pay a lot of money for to bring Colorado River water into the West Valley and to the East Valley through the Coachella Canal. So that Colorado River water is an important part of our water supply portfolio. When that water hits the ground, it percolates through hundreds of feet of sand particles. It's one of the best filters there are. And the only thing in that surface water that doesn't make it potable are microorganisms. So those bacteria gets filtered out in that slow sand filtration. So it leaves water that meets drinking water standards naturally, without chemicals, without disinfection. So that's a good thing. It's a great way to bring the water into the valley. The valley is well suited for where we are putting the water in. We put the water into the ground in the West Valley where all the windmills are. That's where all that blow sand is, where that fine sand is, and it allows excellent percolation rates. So it's a great location. It's well situated, and we don't have a lot of contaminating activities up there. It's pretty much just natural area. We don't have golf courses in that part. We don't have other potential industries, anything that could leave behind pollutants that could go into the ground. So that's a great way that we have located those recharge facilities to protect water quality. A little bit of surface water is used directly in the Palm Springs area through the Desert Water Agency. The rest is all from the groundwater resource. And here's in the bottom right is a photo of the recharge ponds up there that I described in the Whitewater area back in the early 70s. And what those dikes would do would be just to slow the water down and let it soak into the ground. In 1918, the first board of directors, the first action they took was to build some silt dams up there to catch that natural water and soak it into the ground. 1918, they were thinking about groundwater resources in this valley. It's remarkable. And on the picture on the left is the ponds, what they look like now. It's over 600 acres of facilities that we use to get that water into the ground. On an average year, we're talking about $50 million worth of water that we're importing and putting into the ground to ensure we can meet your needs. Here's a facility down in the East Valley, a little bit east of the Lake Kauai. And that facility went into operation in 2009. It's our newest recharge facility. It's putting in about 35,000 acre-feet of water into the ground each year. An acre-foot of water is about the amount of water 2 homes would use in a year's period. And as a result of this facility down in the East Valley, we are seeing water levels rising there. And in that area, you probably saw that photo of the water rising above the early settlers' heads. That was artesian flowing water. Naturally, the settlers would punch holes in the ground, and it was under pressure, artesian pressure, and would rise above the ground without any pumping. Since this recharge facility went into operation, and some of our other water conservation measures, we are now seeing those artesian pressures returning to that East Valley. And that's very important because it protects our water quality. By pressurizing the lower basin, where we're extracting the water, you're preventing that natural saline water in the top from going down into the groundwater. So pressurizing that basin is very important for protecting water quality. In delivering our water, one of the key things we do is find out where to drill the wells. And we have really variable water quality here due to naturally occurring sediment. Water likes to dissolve things. It's the universal solvent. So as soon as it forms in the atmosphere, it's dissolving carbon dioxide, becomes bicarbonate in the water. When it hits the earth, it's dissolving the sediments. It's in your glass, it's dissolving the glass. It's the universal solvent. It wants to become stable by dissolving these minerals into it. So it does get some of those sediments, minerals, calcium, magnesium, potassium, things that we need are all in that water in low levels, very low levels, because of what it does. So we need to locate, we have areas that have high fluoride levels in the valley, and we have areas that have high salinity naturally. So we do these monitoring wells to find the best places to drill our wells. And when we drill a well, we use these casings that have the screened areas, and that's how the water gets into the well. And just like it naturally filters the sediments in the aquifer, filter the bacteria, we use sand particles to keep the sand out of the well. So we size these particles just right size so it doesn't go through the screens, but it traps the sand particles. So those are engineered in size to do that function, to keep the sand, so only the water can pass through the screens into the well. So that's a typical well. We drill very deep wells because it's better water quality. So it protects from what might happen at the surface. We have very deep seals. Instead of a 50-foot seal as required by the state, we'll do seals as much as 800 feet to provide better protection for the water quality. We have dozens of state-certified operators and distribution folks and treatment operators that are making sure that that water meets those standards, making sure that when we convey it through our hundreds of miles of pipelines, that it maintains that high quality. We have distribution reservoirs you'll see on the hillsides. You may have noticed some of them, about 60 of them. That's an important part of our system, and it provides pressure if we have an emergency, if the power goes out. That keeps our lines pressure because they're elevated. That's an important water quality feature. You want those pipes pressurized because when they lose pressure, things can enter into them. Bacteria, things like that. So keeping the system pressurized through these elevated storage reservoirs is a good water quality feature. We also do quite a bit of monitoring to ensure that water is safe. We are in California. They like to have stringent regulations. So we're out there looking for over 100 different constituents. We look at the source, the wells. We look in the system, in the pipes. We even look in the homes for things like lead and copper, things that might come from your home plumbing materials. Those minerals that are in our water coat the inside of your pipes. And that's good because the water would dissolve them without it. So it doesn't dissolve the copper and the lead that might be in your plumbing materials. So at your tap, it meets those standards. We also do backflow prevention testing out there. If you've seen some of these out there, that's a backflow device. We're going through a rash of people stealing them for the brass. And that's about a $20 recovery of metals, but it costs us about $1,300 to replace it when they steal it. So if you ever see anybody stealing those, please call the police, let us know. We have been successful in catching several of them, but we're still working on that. We do quite a bit of reporting to the state as required, and we also do a consumer confidence report or a water quality report. It's on our website. We send it out to our customers. It shows everything that we test for, what we find, what the standards are, and how we rate. So that's an important information that we provide to our customers. There's also things you can do at home to protect water quality. Just using water wisely protects water quality. If you are over-irrigating your lawn, fertilizers can run off into the street and down into the sediments that then filter into the ground. So use your water wisely from that perspective. Don't use your toilets as a trash can. You know, the water is there for organic waste. Organic waste that go into our treatment facilities that can be cleansed and reclaimed. And that water is reclaimed, and we use it for the golf courses irrigations or possibly even future agriculture. So that's an important part of our water resources portfolio. So protect what you put in the toilets. Don't put your used medications in it. You know, that used to be a long time ago, but you know, you can crush those up, mix it with, you know, coffee grinds or cat litter and put it in your trash. Or drug take-back programs. You'll be seeing more and more of those. So you can return those unused drugs back to the pharmacies. And oil and grease. Our sewer systems, the oil and grease can, you can pour it down your sink, but then once it gets into our pipe, it's going to coagulate. And if that continues to happen, you can have plugs. And then that presents sewer that could rise into our environment and cause health issues. So render that great grease and oil at home, put it into a coffee can, and you can throw it in the trash. Those are all ways. Another thing is swimming pool water. Some people drain their swimming pools to the sewer, but that creates a slug of water that comes into the plant that it's not designed for. Plus, it can have high levels of salt that could hurt our ability to recycle that water. So again, the sewer has specific uses. Stick to those uses. So what is in water? H2O, 99.98% H2O. So that's a good thing. So that little sliver there is everything that's not H2O, just this tiny fraction. And in that sliver, over half of it is bicarbonate that I mentioned. And almost the rest of the half are these minerals, the natural minerals that dissolve into the water at very low levels, usually parts per million level. And then you have a few of these trace elements that get a lot of attention. And they're usually in the part per billion level. One drop in a 10,000 gallon swimming pool, your typical residential swimming pool, is 1 part per billion. And we now have equipment that can detect and measure that level of constituent in water. So now things that previously were not known were in water, we now know is there because of that increased technology. And I've listed a few of those things there. And you've probably heard about some of these things. arsenic, chromium. They've been in the news a little bit, so we're going to talk a little bit more about those. And the regulations are what are used to ensure we're providing that water that's safe. And there's a process. It's a scientific process for setting these drinking water regulations. They do risk assessments. Ideally, if you had human risk assessments, those are the best, but usually they're using animal tests, usually rodents. And they do their tests and determine how toxic a constituent might be. And then they go out, and there's a list of a few candidates. So they have a long list of candidates. They try to identify the ones that might be a concern. They look at what's in the water by doing tests of the water. They'll come out with requirements that we test for these new things. And that's what we're always watching for. This is our state certified laboratory here, and we have some of the best state-of-the-art instruments. This one does tests for some of the metals at very low levels, parts per billion level. Can we measure it? Is it feasible to even measure it at the levels that it occurs in water? And then can you remove it? Here's a treatment system in Glendale. Can you technically apply technology that you can remove the constituent? That has to be determined. And then they have to look at the cost. Is it economically feasible to remove the constituent, to measure this constituent? They can't just have a law that no one can meet because it's just too costly. And then it starts over. Every 6 years, they look at every constituent to see, is there new information, new risk assessment data, new technologies that would mean a new regulation. So that's the scientific process. And as a result of those regulations, we've had to start treating water for the first time. Before, come out of the ground, right into the pipes, just excellent. The water hasn't changed. It's the same water we always provided, but the regulations changed. So here, in 1990, they came out with a new bacteria standard. There is no bacteria that is of concern that comes up out of the ground and that we put into the system. But out in the pipes, we can occasionally see coliform bacteria. Coliform bacteria is in our guts. It's on these chairs. We're constantly exposed to it. But it's an indicator. So if it's there, then there may be something else that's a pathogen. So that's why they use it as an indicator. As a result of that regulation, we started adding chlorine to the water, small amounts, that we provide out to our customers to ensure out in the pipes, it stays pure to our customers. And then in 2001, there was a revised arsenic rule. Arsenic occurs out in the East Valley, close to the Salton Sea, naturally. And as a result of that regulation, we had to do some treatment. We did quite a bit of research on that, and the regulation came out in 2001, and we were able to do all the research, build those facilities, and be in compliance with that federal standard by 2006. And it was a lot of work, but we were able to do it, and we learned a lot in the process. And now, Chromium-6 is in the news. The state of California is the only state, and they're moving forward with a drinking water standard for Chromium-6. And that's what I'm talking about now, to give you a little information on that important rule, because it is going to have major impacts for our valley here. Chromium has been regulated by the federal government for many years at a level of 100 parts per billion, all forms of chromium. State of California has had a more stringent standard of 50 parts per billion for many years. And we're meeting that. Our highest levels in this valley are about 20 parts per billion. So now this new regulation would be looking at the chromium-6 portion. And that's why the total chromium levels are set to be protective of chromium-6. So you heard about the scientific process. Now this is a little different process. We did have a blockbuster movie, and that constituent that they looked at was chromium-6. It was up in Hinckley, California. And in that area, there was an industrial pollutant that went into the water at that location. And that was the gist of that movie. That triggered testing for the first time for chromium-6 specifically in about half the water systems in California. And they found, boy, it occurs naturally throughout most of California at very low levels. You can see those levels. That's the UG is parts per billion. So, you can see some black dots. The red dot, here we're down here in the red dot, from 10 to 20 parts per billion. The standard is 50 parts per billion for total chromium. So that then led to our legislators, our lawmakers. They say, hey, I saw the movie. We should be regulating this stuff. So they adopted a law in 2001 that said you have till 2004, state of California, to come out with a drinking water standard for chromium-6, the first in the country. Well, the scientists at the state, they didn't have any information to do that risk assessment to set the standard. So they had to do an animal test, the rodent studies. So they went out and did their rodent studies and got the data. Those rodent studies take about 5 years to complete. So 2001, they had to have the standard by 2004. There was no way they could comply with the lawmakers' timetable. So they were unable to set the standard fast enough. So the environmental group sued the state of California and said, why don't you have the standard by now? Well, they were going through that process to try to get the science to support it. And a judge thought it'd be good if they got involved in it. So they went ahead and mandated for the first time when a standard would be set. And April 15th was the deadline, and the state complied. They had to shorten their process a little bit to do that. And they've come out with a limit of 10 parts per billion. So let's look at the occurrence in the Coachella Valley. I mentioned it's naturally occurring. The sediments that we have in the valley include serpentine, the California state rock, and it has elevated levels of chromium in it. So again, it dissolves naturally. You typically find these close to fault systems. We have some of those in the valley, some major ones. Those red lines on the map show some of those faults. We have a big one splitting the groundwater basins that serve the Desert Hot Springs area up here. We have some wells there. And the groundwater basin that serves most of the rest of the valley. The colors there you see, blue is very low or non-detectable levels of chromium-6. The level here between green and yellow, that's that 10 part per billion transition level. So that would be 10 part per billion. So all of this area here would be above 10 part per billion. Here's Palm Springs. Here's the windmills. This is where we put the water in up by the West Valley. Palm Springs, Cathedral City, Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert, Indian Wells, La Quinta, Indio, Coachella, Thermal, and then the Oasis area down here. Again, variable water quality we see. Down here where we see the arsenic, we have very low levels of chromium. Up here we have no arsenic. The arsenic kind of follows this fault up in this area. So variable water quality, variable chromium-6 levels. You can see there's an association with the faulting. And about half the water we serve is above that 10 part per billion level. We have no chromium in the Colorado River water that we bring in, and that's probably why we're seeing, for 40 years, we've put over 3 million acre feet of Colorado River water into those recharge ponds. And there's no chromium up there. And Palm Springs, the Desert Water Agency, all their wells are below 10, so there'll be no impact from this rule. Down here in the valley, we've started that new facility there down by La Quinta. It's right here. The closest well to that facility was at about 13 part per billion of chromium-6, and now it's at non-detect. So we saw the effects of that Colorado River water with no chromium diluting out what occurs naturally. So that's a great thing that's occurring as a result of the replenishment program, but the basin has a lot of water in it. It's huge. It's 39 million acre feet. We're blessed with that huge resource. So dilution will not be the solution for this one. I think I covered all those. So I'm always asked about health effects. We don't do the health effects studies. That's the state and the scientists and all that. But still, I'm always asked, well, why is this being regulated? What's the deal? So chromium-6, they've known for many years, decades, when you inhale it in an occupational setting, like a chromium ore facility, you would get lung cancer and tongue cancer. So they knew there was threats to that, but the studies they had, when you ingest chromium-6, your body does a little different thing. It converts it to chromium-3. It's a reduction process that occurs when you have low pH, like your stomach and your saliva. And it's rapid conversion. So from that perspective, they felt it was non-carcinogenic because of that natural conversion process. Chromium-6 is an essential nutrient that your body, chromium-3, you need to maintain your blood sugar level. It's very important. Your body's starving to get enough chromium-3 so they can regulate its entire metabolism. So your body's made to do that conversion. Then came this rodent study. And they did their tests like they do. They give rodents very high concentrations of the element that they're testing and see if there's a response. And the number one rule in toxicology, the dose makes the poison. Everything is a poison. If you get too much of it, it's a problem. The question is, at what level is that too much? Does it occur? So they started the rodents at 5,000 parts per billion. That was the lowest dose because they knew that under that level, they didn't absorb it into their bloodstream. They wanted to see a response, so they started at 5,000 parts per billion and went up to 90,000 parts per billion on the male mice. The male mice was the one they used for their risk assessment. The rats got oral tumors. The mice got small intestine tumors. The small intestine is just after the stomach. The stomach is where the conversion takes place. There are scientists that believe they overwhelmed the rodent's ability to do the conversion, and it went into the small intestine, killed the cells, and caused the tumors. So there's the results. You'll see here about 40% of the rodents in the test had tumors. So these two levels, above 20,000 parts per billion, 20,000 parts per billion, we're down at 10 in our valley. And they saw results. Down here, no statistical change from the control. So they even had lower levels at 10,000 parts per billion. So this shows that there was clear evidence it was an animal carcinogen, which triggers it a different level of assessment because it's a carcinogen. Regardless of the level, it's a carcinogen. They felt it was a possible human carcinogen. They looked all over the world, including Hinckley, California. They did 3 epidemiology studies to look to see if there was a result there, an effect there. And they actually had lower cancer risk levels in the Hinckley area. But they didn't stop there. They looked all over the country. They looked all over the world. Closest thing they found was in China. In 1987, there was a village that was drinking yellow water downstream of a chromium ore facility. The author found no significant cancer risk. The California risk assessors looked at it and said, well, looks like there might be a stomach cancer association. But it wasn't powerful. It wasn't enough for them to set their risk assessment. So it is based on this rodent study. Meanwhile, EPA is looking at it. They're looking at not only that study, this rodent study, but 14 new studies that look kind of more in detail in how the rodents got the tumors. So what is the benefit? The state has calculated there would be 12 theoretical avoided cancer cases if we all the water systems comply with this new standard of 10 part per billion, statewide. So if you use that assessment and you use the levels we have, the population we serve, it's about 1 theoretical annual avoided cancer case. They don't know what cancer It's not a specific cancer or anything because they don't know what happens in humans. They know what happens in the rodents. So that's the benefit. And it's based on this dose-response model. And so they gave the rodents high levels, high doses, and they got a response. Over 20,000 parts per billion, they saw increased tumor formation. Our drinking water is down here under 50 parts per billion. So how do they correlate that? Well, they draw a line. And this would be a linear, no threshold cancer risk model. So they say if this much chromium caused tumors, then that much chromium still causes a tumor. Because it's a linear relationship. It's an assumption. It's a precautionary. It's a safe assumption. Now, there's also scientists out there, and many constituents have a threshold dose. So you're down here at a low dose. You're down here, at a low dose. There's no response until you hit some threshold, and then you start to see the effects. Many contaminants have this. Many scientists believe that that is a normal model. So the difference is, do you use a precautionary approach to be ultimately safe, or do you use more of a detailed look at it to see if there is some level that there's a threshold? So there's two philosophies. There's scientists on both sides. EPA's looking at this model to see if this is right. We don't know what they'll come out with. Maybe they'll take the precautionary approach. The state of California has taken the precautionary approach. So that's what it's based on. And now we have to comply with it. So when we built our arsenic removal facilities in 2001, Aaron Brockovich movie came out. The lawmakers set the law to come out with the standard. So we knew chromium-6 was coming. So we were the first in the country to build a facility that removes both chromium and arsenic. And we did a lot of research to be able to determine what that would take. This is a facility down in Mecca that's 4,000 gallons per minute. It's a very large facility, treating water from 2 wells. And now you're going to see a little video of 4 minutes that will describe what happens there.
Coachella Valley Water District's ion exchange plant is located next to Highway 86 Expressway near Mecca, California. Here, water from 2 wells is treated to remove both arsenic and chromium-6. 2 treatment processes occur within the plant. One process uses ion exchange technology to remove chromium-6 and arsenic from the raw well water. The second process removes chromium-6 and arsenic from the waste brine to reduce disposal costs. Here's how the process works. Raw groundwater from the 2 wells is pumped into a manifold that distributes the water to pre-treatment filters. Next, the raw water is brought into the plant. Through a distribution manifold, the water is sent to a vessel. There are 2 sets of 16 fiberglass vessels. Each set of vessels is called a train. Each vessel is nearly full of a strong base and ion exchange resin. The resin looks like large sand-sized plastic beads. The vessel is nearly full of this resin material. As the raw water comes into the top of the vessel, it percolates through the resin bed. The resin attracts and holds chromium-6 and arsenic ions and releases chloride ions into the water. After the water has passed through the vessel, it meets all state and federal drinking water standards. Common salt water or brine is used to regenerate the resin. The wastewater brine containing the chromium-6 and arsenic is sent to the brine water reactors for processing. In the reactors, the brine water is mixed with iron ions and acid. Air and a polymer are added to create oxidized iron particles that combine with the chromium 6 and arsenic ions. The mixing is stopped, and the iron particles are allowed to precipitate to the bottom of the reactors. The treated salt brine found above the sludge is removed for disposal. The sludge from the bottom of the reactors is sent to a holding tank. From there, it is sent to a filter press. Under high pressure, the sludge is pressed through the membrane. The brine water passes through, but the iron that holds the chromium 6 and arsenic deposit as a waste on the membrane. The membrane filter plates are separated and scraped clean of the waste. A hopper below the press directs the waste into plastic drums. Once filled, the drums are sealed, labeled, and transported as hazardous waste to a disposal site in Nevada.
So, removing the chromium and arsenic from the water is easy. It's dealing with the waste. You saw a lot of that was all about managing the waste that was in the salt brine and then how we dispose of it. And all that is to reduce the cost, because that's the most expensive part of the process, is disposing of the waste and doing it efficiently. So what we're doing is looking at, we know that process works and it works well, and we may use some of that, but we have variable water quality conditions. In parts of our valley, the sulfate levels, natural mineral in our water, are too high for that treatment process. So we're looking at alternative treatment processes. We started about 2 years ago. We got Water Research Foundation national funding to help on that. And we got 2 of those research projects ongoing right now, looking at 2 alternative treatment processes. There's a lot of data now available on that. They're both expensive. They're about the same cost as what we're already doing. But that process that we're doing now might not work in some of these areas, so we may have to do some of these processes. But here's some of the pilot facilities that we're doing. Just smaller versions in these columns. In the columns here, we have the resin, and so we're testing a different type of resin that doesn't need the salt brine regeneration. And that process these tests are going to be done here in the next few months. And it was all part of the process. You know, we started 2 years ago not waiting for the number, but knowing what the level is was very important to know what type of treatment process we could in. So we couldn't go out and start installing facilities until we have the number. If it was at 1 part per billion, these processes wouldn't even have met that level. We'd have to go with a reverse osmosis, a more expensive process. So what's the impact? That's another question we always get. How much is it going to cost? What is it? So we have about 57 of our 100 wells that we think will be impacted at this level. We're going to refine that to make sure maybe we don't need all 57 wells, but currently that's what it is. We used the state's cost model, and we applied it to our wells. About $518 million of capital costs. We're still researching. We're going to try to get that number down, but that's what it is now. Annualized cost of $69 million, and that's about $50 a month for every one of our customers' services. So it's a very expensive. It's doubles the cost to provide the service that we provide. And that's not going to happen in one rate increase. You know, it would be incremental, and we're doing everything we can to try to bring that cost down with these treatment studies. But it takes time, and it's going to take time to build these facilities. This would be the largest, most costly public works project ever done in the Coachella Valley. And we're just one agency. City of Coachella, all their wells. City of Indio, all their wells are impacted. Desert Hot Springs, several of their wells. Huge impact for the valley. So we're doing these research studies. We're going to complete a source of supply study that kind of brings it all together, develops a compliance plan by the end of this year. We're going to look at our funding options. You know, if there's grants, we'll go for them. You know, this problem is trying to get that money for something that has only a chronic health effect. It's not an immediate health effect for anyone. But long term, they look at these risks over the life of drinking exposed to that water. That's what the regulation is protective of. So those rate a little lower than the acute health risks like bacteria or other contaminants that have acute issues. So that money often is not available to help. So customers are likely to have to pay for most of this. And we're continuing our outreach. One of the concerns we have, you know, when I talked about the arsenic rule, when it came out, we had 5 years to install the facilities to comply with the rule. State of California, they like to do things a little differently. So when they come out with a new drinking water standard in front of EPA, which they have done, and now they've done it, first state in the country to come out with this Chromium standard, we expect it to be effective on July 1st of this summer. We have 6 months to begin our compliance monitoring. So once we start our compliance monitoring and the levels are above the limit, we could be deemed out of compliance. They don't give us 5 years to build the facilities like the federal government under the Safe Drinking Water Act. They're required to do that. And the state does give time for other laws that they come out with, but this one they don't. So we are trying to get that fixed. We're working with the governor's office, legislators. We think when they come out with a new law like this, they should give us time to install the facilities to comply before we have to be determined out of compliance. So we do have a letter in the back of the room to let your legislators know, if you agree, that we think this is important, that the state should give us time to comply, give us a reasonable amount of time to build these facilities. We know what it takes. It takes time to do these. We've got a 2-year head start. Most water systems in California hadn't even started. They're waiting for the final rule to come out. With a 2-year head start, it's still going to take us at least 5 years to comply. So we're hoping that we will get some of that time. We're looking in this study at even a point of use devices under the sink that would be installed on all of our customers' homes. And it could actually be a way to go for future drinking water standards too, because that reverse osmosis system can remove all the constituents that will likely be regulated in the future. So while expensive, it could be the long way to go. Treating the 1 to 4 gallons you use for ingesting and cooking instead of all the water that we serve through the pipes that go out to your lawn and down your toilet makes a whole lot of sense. And it would be a big culture shift for our customers to know that this is the tap they get the drinking water from and not the other taps. And it could only be used for things that aren't a problem to bathe in the water. Obviously, you still have to serve water that you can bathe in and all that. But for these minute risks and contaminants in minute levels, if they want to regulate it to that level, it may be the way to go. But right now, under state law, they don't allow you to use it for compliance. So that would require some legislation. This would be a way that we would consolidate. Our well sites are too small, many of them, for putting treatment plants on. So we'd have to find land, build the treatment plant here, put pipes in the ground to get the water to the treatment plant. That means tearing up the streets. That drives the costs way up. Everyone's going to hate us because we're tearing up the streets to put these pipes in. So this would be one approach. We're looking at, hopefully, a different approach where we don't have to do that. But it is, and we're also looking at Colorado River water, surface water, direct treatment of Colorado River water into the system. 33 million people are already doing it, and that might be a cost-effective approach that we're looking at. So this is the discussion time, question time. I've got a few primer questions up there that we get, like the milky appearance. Why is my water milky? And if you've watched that glass, it'll clear up from the bottom to the top. That's air. And our water is served to you pressurized, so air is in solution. When you relieve the pressure by opening the faucet, it comes out of solution, just like a soda can. You open it and the carbon dioxide comes out of solution, it fizzes. That's what you see there. It's just air. Get a little medicinal taste, kind of a little metallic. What is that? It's the chlorine, small amount of chlorine that we add. About 50% of the people can taste it at that level, 50% can't. It's all yours if you have any questions. I see one already.
Turned on? Yes. Okay, you mentioned earlier about swimming pool water not going into the sewer.
Yes.
So the disposal of it in the storm drains is okay?
Yeah, in fact, you can go to your city and get a permit. It's like a $5 permit. Some cities require permits, some don't. And what they want to make sure is that you let the chlorine dissipate in the pool before you pump it out into the street. And they may say you got to do it at nighttime or something like that because they don't want it flooding. But as long as that chlorine dissipates, then when it goes out into the environment, if it were to reach a river or a stream where fish are there, it wouldn't harm them. That's why, so yeah, it doesn't, that is an approved way to deal with the swimming pool water. Yep. Yes?
My mother lived in a part of Florida where homeowners were mandated to use recycled water in their yards. It seems a waste to remove chromium and arsenic from water that you're using to water your garden.
Yeah, and that's something we're looking at. Right now, the regulators are very resistant to that point of use approach. They're concerned, what if someone got up in the middle of the night and used their bathroom faucet instead of the other? It would take education. You'd have to educate the people in your home. It is a culture shift, but...
I think these were hoses outside.
Okay, for recycled water. Well, we have recycled water to our systems. We have a lot of big turf users here in the valley. So it's a great place. We can really efficiently send recycled water to these big users. So it's really unlikely that we'll need to send it to existing homes, but new home developments will be built with recycled water systems in serving the outside areas. Yes?
And no oil down the drain, is that vegetable oils like olive oil?
Oils that coagulate, like if you were to let that sit in your pan after you fry up the tortillas, that's something you'll want to render it. Because when it cools, it coagulates, and we don't want that to coagulate in the pipes.
But olive oil is okay?
Yeah. Mostly it would be okay, but it would probably be good to put it in the same coffee can. Yeah. Sorry, I had a question back there. Yes.
I'm from New York, and I've never seen so much white crust around all the faucets out here.
Yes.
What is it, and why is it, and can we get rid of it?
New York City, it's amazing. You think, oh, well, they've got all these industrial and such a big city and everything. It has some of the best water. It flows off of a natural source, surface water runoff. In fact, they don't even have to filter it for many years. It wasn't even disinfected. It would flow off that watershed and into the system. So not much time for the minerals to dissolve in the water. So here, we're using groundwater. It's been down there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So more time for the minerals, for it to do its dissolving. So we have those minerals. The calcium, the magnesium is primarily what you're seeing. Calcium carbonate, magnesium carbonate. And it is also what coats the inside of your pipes. And it doesn't clog your pipes, but it puts a nice film on that, which makes those pipes last. It also leaves spots on your fixtures and your shower doors and those things. But it's calcium and magnesium carbonate. No, you don't need to filter it. People that call, they usually have that question about, well, it's leaving a mess everywhere, you know. And I guess you have to weigh that, because when you do soften the water, softening is an ion exchange process. You're replacing the calcium and magnesium with sodium ions in that case. So you've got to weigh, is that aesthetic important enough to install a softening facility? Just remember, if you're serving that softened water through your home plumbing system, you are then going to make the water more aggressive, and it will begin to dissolve that calcium in the inside of your pipes. And eventually, with enough time, it could start dissolving your pipe material. I think that one was first.
Is the 518 million cost going to be shared by all cities equally, regardless of whether they have a high level or a low level of the Chromium 6?
Good question. We've done, you know, when I started 25 years ago, we had 22 water systems, 22 little water systems in that area that is now served by one water system. So consolidating the systems provides better reliability, very important. So we have a more reliable water system because it's all interconnected. We can supply water from Cathedral City to Thermal and the other way too. So when we have a mainline break in Cathedral City that requires a $5 million fix, everyone shares in that cost. So when we have treatment plants in Ranch Mirage or maybe some La Quinta, everybody's going to share in the cost. And it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. It'll help keep the cost down for all rather than having an extreme difference in rates. However, you know, who knows? There are different ways we could do the cost modeling. And, you know, we could do different rate structures, but that'll be for our board to decide when the time comes. And, you know, once we develop our plan, we're going to have outreach to our stakeholders, our customers. So there'll be opportunity for input on the process. Yes?
Talking about costs, we just bought a new home, and it came with a reverse. We bought a new home and came with a reverse osmosis system. I have no idea what it costs to install it, but that just was part of our price. The fellow who came to service it said he'd charge us about $200 every other year, and I'd rather pay $200 every other year than $50 a month.
Good point. Good point. And it's about $300. You can get it at a warehouse store. Put it under the counter. Once a year, change the membranes out for about $120. You know, it wouldn't just be the homes. It would be all the public drinking fountains, all the schools. So you're talking about a lot of units. But when you start talking the numbers we're talking about just for this rule, it starts to make sense. And then reverse osmosis, very tight membrane that you're pressurizing the water and it's removing all the ions, calcium and sodium and chloride. Almost just H2O comes out on the other side. So vanadium, strontium, molybdenum all occur naturally in our groundwater. And it's not regulated currently, but we're currently monitoring for them. We're in that phase of monitoring for these unregulated contaminants that include those ones that may be 10 years from now, the next chromium. So that reverse osmosis system would take care of all those things. So it may make a lot of sense. Sounds like you're set for the future. I had a question in the back there.
Since this was done by the state government, can the federal government get involved to reverse the process and let us have a 5-year wait? And will our signing the letters help at all?
Okay, federally, no. The state can do whatever they want, as long as it's at least as stringent as the federal law. So the state can come out with a new Chromium standard that's lower than the federal government would ever do, and they don't have to give us time to comply. Will letters make a difference? Well, we will need the legislators to support any change. We tried it in the regulation. We were very active. You can go online and see our letter. We evaluated this rule. We suggested they fix this 2 years ago, and they didn't. They said they can't do it regulatorily, but under state, they can do it. The legislators can adopt a statute that would require the state to give us the 5-year to comply. So legislators need to hear about it, and whether it's this rule or a future one, it's the right thing to do. We should be given time to comply with new regulations. It just makes sense. Follow up?
Even with that said, are you still going ahead and charging people starting on July 1st the $50?
No, we're not going to charge anyone July 1st the $50. So first we're going to complete this compliance plan, and it's due to be completed in December, to identify the most cost-effective way to comply with this rule. And next year, when we're going through the budget process, we'll have a lot of input. We'll know what it takes. We'll have a refined plan and costs, and that's when we'll start talking about how we're going to pay for it. So, and it's likely going to occur incrementally over time. We can't run out there and install $500 million of facilities. There's environmental planning. In California, I mean, to think, we got to go through we got to assess the environmental impacts. It takes years to do all that. To think that, here's the new law, I'll comply with it right away. In California, it just doesn't make sense.
I have a question. Like LA, DWP, and all the water districts in Los Angeles with the Colorado River water, do they have these same issues that the Coachella Valley is having?
No. They use mostly surface water, either from the State Water Project or the Colorado River water system, and those have low levels or non-detectable levels of chromium. They have a few scattered, like rural areas that they serve, kind of in the eastern north LA area. Lancaster Metropolitan has a few in those areas, and some of those have some wells that might be impacted, but they're just a fraction of the services that they provide.
So in essence, Coachella Valley, being a comparably small water district, is sort of fighting this battle by themselves?
Good question. We are the largest public water system in California impacted by this rule. We have the most wells impacted, but we're not fighting it by ourselves. Indio and Coachella were also involved in the input process. City of Watsonville's been very active in Northern California. But how many of the big water agencies were involved? They were there, they provided the comments, but certainly we were carrying a big burden. And we worked with the water associations, the Association of California Water Agencies, the Association of Water Works for the National, all helped in evaluating the state's rule, providing comments on it. So we weren't by ourselves.
Other question?
Great. Well, we're about 1 hour. 1 hour. Did we get everything? Yep. Okay. Good. Well, thank you again. Yep.